Hello and welcome. I'm Sanjay Khandelwal, and this is The Break School, a podcast to enable you to do what you love and live a more deliberate life. Before we jump into today's episode, I just want to thank you all because The Break School completed 1 year this week. No matter when you joined us, in the first episode or in the third episode or in the 30th episode, your association and love means the world to me. So, my only request here as we finish 1 year and move on to another exciting year is stay connected. Keep writing to me whenever you find something you love or whenever you have time. And most importantly, never stop in your pursuit of finding something you love and doing it as much as possible. Now, as always, without wasting any time, let's jump into our today's episode with a simple story. A few years ago, I had a surgery. After the surgery, I visited my doctor quite regularly for a few months for checkup. Every time the doctor picked up his tools to examine me, I would tighten my body. I would make my face as if I was in deep pain. My doctor was confused. He had not even touched me. However, over a period of time, both my doctor and I realized that I was not really reacting to any pain, but to the fear of experiencing pain. In my head, I was already expecting a lot worse pain than I would actually experience when you'd examine me. Turns out, I'm not the only one to act this way. You would have often seen kids shout even before the needle touches them when you take them to the doctor. According to a study that was presented at the Anesthesiology 2017 annual meeting in the US, around 200 patients were asked before the surgery to evaluate the level of pain they expected to experience after the surgery. This was on a scale of 1 to 10. So let's say a patient is going into a surgery, the doctor would ask them, what level of pain do you think you will experience after the surgery on a scale of 1 to 10? Now, after the surgery was done, and once the effect of anesthesia was over, anesthesia basically makes you not experience the pain, and that's why even if you're awake, you won't experience the pain, even if somebody's operating on you. But once the anesthesia is gone, you start experiencing the actual pain. So after the surgery, once the effect of anesthesia has lowered, the doctors asked the patient again to evaluate the actual pain they were now experiencing on a scale of 1 to 10. And the researchers found that there was a significant difference, indicating that people often overestimate the amount of pain they would experience from the surgery than they actually did. So, when people are asked before the surgery, they would have, let's say, said on a scale of 8 or 9, but after the surgery, the actual pain was somewhere at a level of 6 or 5. Now, there is nothing wrong in anticipating pain. In fact, it is super useful. Expecting pain forces us to be cautious and alert. It stops us from taking unnecessary risks. It pushes us to save money for rainy days and prevents us from doing some really stupid things. The problem, however, is we do not know how much pain to actually anticipate. More often than not, we overestimate the amount of pain we will experience from doing something, and this, in a lot of ways, hugely limits our growth. Let me give you another example. And here, the pain is not physical as much as it is physiological, or let's say some kind of unnecessary anxiety. I've been part of this community called Toastmasters for several years. It's a public speaking forum where a group of people meet every week or once in 2 weeks to learn and develop their public speaking skills. So, whenever you want to deliver a speech, you book a slot in advance, you schedule a day, and on that day, you go to the meeting in front of an audience, deliver your speech. Now, I've given more than 50 speeches. That should make me a super confident and fearless speaker, right? The answer is not at all. I am certainly confident, but fearless, nowhere around. Even today, when I book a speech slot, and let's say I'm supposed to deliver a speech on Saturday, by Monday, I start feeling anxious. I curse myself for having booked the slot. I wonder if I should just postpone the speech. On the day of the speech, which is on Saturday here, I think of all possible reasons I could give to not go to the meeting and give the speech. I would think of reasons like, hey, listen, I'm really unwell. Hey, there's a medical emergency home. I'm really sorry. I won't be able to pick up the phones in the evening. Oh, there's a there's a there's a death in the family, dude. I can't make it today. Hey, dude, my boss is a tyrant. He's pulled me into some emergency task on a weekend. I really cannot help it. I'm really sorry. I'll have to skip the meeting. There are other creative reasons that I've come up with, which I cannot put it out here. But what I'm glad about is, despite the fear of delivering a mediocre performance or screwing up and being laughed at, I rarely backed out. I would always deliver my speech no matter how terrible I felt. And here's the beauty of doing that. After every possible speech I've delivered, I walked out feeling great. Of course, I did screw up a few times. There were speeches I would even hate to look back at. But the pain of screwing up was nowhere close to what I was anticipating before delivering the speech. And here's the funniest part. Despite having this awareness that I overreact to the fear or pain of screwing up or giving a bad performance, I still have the same kind of anxiety before delivering a new speech. I still tighten my body when I see a doctor, despite knowing that the examination is not going to be painful. Even when I'm podcasting, before every interview I start, I feel anxious that I'm going to screw it up. Now, the question that you may have is, why do we feel this way? Why do we behave this way? There are two possible reasons. Reason number one, loss aversion. Nobel Prize laureate Daniel Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky have shown that our tendency to avoid losses is twice as much as our desire to make gains. Now, what does this mean? In my context, it simply means that the loss or pain I would experience on delivering a bad speech would be roughly twice as much as the joy I would experience on delivering a good speech. Hence, my fear of screwing up is far higher than my desire to learn something new. Now, this behavior has an evolutionary reason. As Daniel Kahneman writes in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, organisms that treat threat as more urgent than opportunities have a better chance to survive and reproduce. Now, let me elaborate a little bit on this. We humans are designed to respond to threats or dangers and rewards or opportunities. Now, in the early days, while we were in the jungles and while we had to fight with other animals for survival, etc., the threats were more physical, dangers from wild animals, other tribes, etc. Now, in our modern world, the threats are not as much physical as they are mental or emotional, such as not meeting our goals or being disappointed with our salaries, feeling sad after being rejected, not getting a like on Instagram, etc., etc., etc. Now, when we're trying something new, we anticipate failure or ridicule or some other kind of negative emotions. And negative emotion is in itself seen as a threat. We do not want to experience them and hence avoid doing new things to avoid feeling sad rather than achieve long term rewards of learning something new. So, the reason one is loss aversion. Our tendency to avoid losses is twice as much as our desire to make gains. Reason two, we grossly underestimate our ability to cope with negative events. Psychologists Daniel Gilbert and Tim Wilson have shown that we often overestimate the impact of certain positive or negative events on our lives. For example, they asked people how happy would they be after getting married or how happy would they be after getting a promotion. Most people gave a really high score, which was certainly much higher than their current level of happiness. Naturally, after they got married or got the promotion, they were really happy. But the happiness came down after a few years because the marriage or the promotion became a norm. They just got used to it. Similarly, when people were asked how would they feel if they lost a limb, similarly, when people were asked how would they feel if they lost a limb or a leg or a hand or if they were fired from their job, the answer would always be no, I'll be crushed. I won't be able to take it at all. But again, Daniel Gilbert has shown that many people, even after having these terrible life incidences, have returned back to normal level of happiness. Now, this is certainly not to imply that losing a limb or job has no impact on your life. Of course, it does. You lose a specific capability. But what it really implies is we often ignore or underestimate our ability to adapt. We neglect our ability to cope with failures or even with the worst incidences of life. As a result, we often stay away from trying simple things like learning a new skill or taking up new responsibilities or doing something that just catches our curiosity because we underestimate our ability to cope with negative events or with failures if they occur. Now, what does this mean for all of us? Well, there are so many things that make us curious. There are so many things that interest us, so many things that we want to learn and master, but we rarely start because we are terrible at it right now. It is painful to acknowledge we do not know. It is painful to learn something from scratch just because you love doing it and there is no immediate reward. Now, can we avoid over exaggerating our fears and overestimating our pain and avoid neglecting our ability to cope with negative events? Now, honestly, you cannot eliminate loss aversion or tendency to overestimate pain. These are behaviors designed into us over a long period of time. And by that, I mean thousands and thousands of years. And I don't have any quick hacks or magic pill that could make you just overcome them. But with some consistent work, you can take control of what you do despite these tendencies still being there. Now, these are few things that you can try that I'm pretty sure will help. Number one, consciously observe what are you afraid of repeatedly. Let's say you want to learn to write or become a stand-up comedian, but every time you want to try, you feel terrible. Here's the trick. No matter how you feel, note down in a book what are you really afraid of? How do you really feel? And then go ahead and do what you want to do anyway, irrespective of how you feel. Publish 5 or 6 articles or do a few more open mics. Every time you finish one, again consciously observe over the next few days, how do you feel? Come back to your notebook and write down your observations. And now compare, what were you anticipating before you tried and how are you actually feeling after you tried? If you feel just as terrible, then by all means don't do it again. But if you realize that it isn't as bad as you thought, if you are actually getting better at it with every attempt, then that's your insight. When you make your next attempt and feel terrible again, go back to your note. Remind yourself that your body is fooling you. It isn't going to be as terrible as your mind wants you to believe. Number two, expose yourself to a little pain every day. A few months ago, I started practicing yoga. One of the posture I had to sit in is Vajrasan. It was an extremely painful posture initially. I could barely sit for a minute. However, now I can sit in Vajrasan for up to 20 minutes at a stretch. How? By increasing the duration of pain every day. When I began, I would sit for a minute, then 5, then 6, 7, 10, 15, and now 20. If you're afraid or hesitant to do something, you don't have to do it in one shot. Expose yourself to your fears or pain a little every day. Let your mind and body get used to it. And finally, point number three, don't seek perfection. Put yourself out and screw up a few times. Now, understand you cannot build competency in something without doing it a few times and without screwing up a few times. In most cases, doing something involves putting yourself in public view and exposing yourself to public scrutiny, judgment, and even ridicule. Although, trust me, in most cases, people don't give two hoots about what you're doing. People don't think about you, don't judge you as much as you think they do. And if they really do, take it as a feedback. See what worked and what did not, and keep getting better consistently with every new attempt. In short, if there is something you want to do but you're frequently afraid to try, then just make a note of what you're most afraid of. Go ahead and try anyway, and then reflect, was it as bad as you thought? In most cases, it is not. So now, repeat the cycle. I'm not saying this is going to make you fearless or lessen your pain, but it will certainly make you aware of your ability to deal with it. Good luck and do what you love every day.